among them 128 Americans. The incident was used to turn American public opinion against Germany and was an important issue that helped push the United States into the war. Though the Germans ultimately lost, they had demonstrated the effectiveness of submarine warfare against merchant shipping. After the war, the U.S. Navy looked to improve the capabilities of its submarine fleet, but existing technology proved a limiting factor. S-class boats, built between 1920 and 1925, were designed primarily for coastal defense purposes, not to cruise vast expanses of ocean. Though significantly larger than their predecessors, storage space aboard was extremely limited, and living quarters cramped beyond comfort. Derisively called pig boats by their crews, S-boats more than lived up to their nickname. While designers worked to improve functional capabilities, strategists sought to address questions of identity and mission. Two competing interpretations of submarine doctrine emerged. One camp foresaw submarines employed in a fleet support role, the other as an economic warfare arm of its own, modeled on the German successes of the First World War. However, American naval thinking was oriented towards fighting other navies, which left commerce raiding with no real place in strategic planning or training. It was determined that U.S. Navy submarines would fight other warships, and under the guidelines imposed by the 1930 London Naval Conference, would not attack merchant ships without first providing warning. Though this attitude negatively impacted tactical training in the years leading up to World War II, long-range strategic planning proved critical to the development of submarine technology. The rise of Imperial Japan had been a cause of increasing concern in the West since the turn of the century. Anticipating an eventual war, the United States developed War Plan Orange, which relied heavily on battleships, but included submarines as scouts for the fleet.
They would go up from a picket line in front of the main fleet. You'd see the enemy fleet showing up. They'd take a couple shots at them as they went by. They would radio back and let the main fleet know they were on their way. Many of the generals after World War I were thinking that it was going to be like Jutland, where you have all the huge battleships and battle cruisers firing away at each other for a couple of minutes and see who came out the least bruised, and then everybody go home. And of course, then the submarine would still be out on the picket lines, and after they had this big exchange, this decisive battle, they would pick up the stragglers as they went down. So they anticipated that as the role for this submarine. The problem was that was how things happened in 1917 in Jutland. That's not how they were going to happen in 1937 or 40.
American submarine designers set out to produce a sub that would combine long-range cruising capabilities and a surface speed in excess of 20 knots with the very latest in technical advances.
We had the S-boats, and the S-boats were basically like the German submarines. And so we tried to develop what we call fleet submarines, which were designed to operate with the fleet. And so they were longer range, bigger submarines, more capabilities.
The Barracuda class, the first of a series of subs originally thought to meet the fleet boat criteria, proved less than ideal, and the Argonaut class, which followed in 1928, possessed the range but was able only to achieve an unacceptable 15 knots. The Narwhal class, commissioned in 1930, didn't perform much better. Although improvements were seen in the performance of the Dolphin and Cachalot classes, which appeared in 1932 and 1933 respectively, there remained a seemingly insurmountable problem. The diesel engines powering all these craft simply didn't measure up. The solution finally appeared when diesel engines developed for railroad locomotives proved both powerful and reliable enough to meet fleet requirements. Employing diesel-electric motors for the first time, the P-class submarines, constructed between 1935 and 1936, marked a tremendous improvement over the previous candidates, with a surface speed of 19 knots and a range of 10,000 miles. In a departure from earlier designs, the engines were coupled to a large generator rather than propeller shafts, making it possible to use the full power output to drive the boat, charge the batteries, or for a combination of the two. When the boat was submerged and diesels had to be shut down, the batteries provided all necessary power. All welded construction became standard beginning with the P-class, producing a much stronger hull that allowed the boat to dive to 300 feet. The 1938 Submarine Officers Conference sought to improve on the P-class by refining fleet requirements. In addition to 6 forward and 4 stern torpedo tubes and more reload torpedoes, it was recommended that the next class include an improved torpedo data computer, a longer, thinner periscope, a 5-inch deck gun, and the ability to cruise at fleet speed on voyages of 12,000 miles. Habitability was to be improved by the addition of freshwater distillation units and air conditioning. The Navy got all that and more with the Tambor class, the submarine that at last possessed the speed and firepower necessary for a fleet boat. Capable of 21 knots surfaced and 10 submerged, they could crash dive to periscope depth in under a minute. With good seakeeping, great handling, and excellent habitability, the 300-foot-long Tambor class provided sufficient elbow room for long war patrols. The U.S. Navy's first fleet sub had come of age.
The foresight of our building submarines in 1938 that would go across the Pacific Ocean and back, round trip, signified that our leaders knew there was a potential hazard and a potential conflict coming up with Japan. They were going to the enemy in that area.
The Tambor class, consisting of the submarines Tambor, Tautog, Thresher, Triton, Trout, and Tuna, would eventually make a combined 70 war patrols and sink 80 enemy ships. The average of 13 ships per submarine was unmatched by any other class of boat. USS Tautog became the fleet's leading ace, with 26 Japanese ships to her credit. In 1940, the follow-on to the Tambor class appeared. Gato-class submarines were fast, heavily armed subs, well suited for an undersea war against Japan. At 312 feet long, Gatos comfortably accommodated a crew of 80. They could make 20 knots on the surface and nearly 9 submerged, and were equipped for journeys of 10,000 miles or more. Gatos and their immediate successor, the Palau class, became the bane of Japanese merchant ships during World War II.
They were faster, longer range, and a lot more torpedoes, and a lot thicker hull. Our diving depth, the Tautog was a riveted submarine. The P-class was the last of the riveted submarines because they went to welded hulls after that. And she was a thin hull. Our test depth was 250 feet. The new boats, 550 up.
With 6 tubes forward and 4 tubes aft, Gato-class subs could carry up to 24 torpedoes. Its primary weapon, the Mark 14 torpedo, had an alcohol-powered steam turbine engine that could propel it at 46 knots for up to 4 miles.
A beautiful piece of mechanism, those torpedoes. And when you consider how they work with the steam and with the burning of the alcohol, with the propulsions that they develop from that pipe, they're just a tremendous piece of equipment.
The Mark 14's 668-pound warhead was detonated by the Mark 6 influenced exploder, a device the Navy believed would revolutionize submarine warfare.
The magnetic exploder mechanism, which was a super secret device that was supposed to detonate the torpedo that came in proximity with any large mass of steel.
Yet, in spite of the improvements made to American submarines, the U.S. Navy submarine force was woefully unprepared for the type of warfare they were about to face. On December 7, 1941, there were 50 submarines attached to the U.S. Pacific Fleet. 21 were stationed at Pearl Harbor and 29 at Manila Bay. Of these, a number were the earlier S-class boats built in the 1920s. Only 4 were in Pearl Harbor at 7:55 a.m. when the Japanese began their attack.
I heard all this explosion like everybody else, and I thought, my goodness, I think they leave us alone on Sunday morning for a we thought maybe was practice. They told me to get up on my gun, which was right next step above me. And I was a gun captain on 525 and yes, got it. And we had 50 rounds of ammunition left. And we started firing like everybody else was firing. Everything was flying. We got credit for 4, but you know, the whole world was shooting.
In little more than 2 hours, the Japanese casualties caused personnel losses of more than 2,400 killed and 1,200 wounded, sank 4 battleships, and damaged 4 more. Sank or damaged 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, 1 minelayer, and destroyed 188 aircraft. In the aftermath of the devastating attack, no surface fleet of any consequence remained in the Pacific.
The program happened, and the Japanese didn't bother with the submarines. The submarine base was just a short distance away from Battleship Row.
In fact, a couple of the guys on the boat said, yeah, they waved to us. They had their cockpits laid back and they would wave and smile and drop their torpedoes and boat. And then right beyond the submarine base was our main Pacific oil storage tanks. They didn't hit them either.
The loss of the battleship fleet greatly reduced the strength of U.S. naval forces in the Pacific and placed Navy planners in a situation they never anticipated. They now had only one weapon system immediately available to take the war to the enemy.
There was no other arms to set out to hold the enemy back or get back at the enemy other than the submarines.
The submarines carried the fight to the jets until the surface can they could prepare their ships to get back on duty.
Just hours after the Pearl Harbor attack, Admiral Harold Stark, the chief of naval operations, ordered all available boats to immediately put to sea, and for those already underway to conduct unrestricted submarine warfare against anything Japanese. Stark's call for unrestricted warfare meant that U.S. submarine commanders could now seek out and attack any ship flying the flag of the rising sun. However, this new strategy presented some serious problems. Prior to the war, tactical planning called for submarines to support the Navy's capital ships. That doctrine was now obsolete. Furthermore, training exercises for submarine warfare had emphasized offensive operations against swifter warships and not against the slower lumbering merchant vessels which they were now permitted to engage. It's not surprising then that the submarine campaign got off to a slow start.
The Navy had a plan orange that they had originally set up for the submarines part to work with the battle fleet. And that plan was no good. And it took quite a while for them to realize this. And it was the younger officers that came in there and took command that really showed them where they were wrong. And it was the older officers that had been taught that procedure. They had a problem breaking away from it.
Within days of the Pearl Harbor attack, the boats based in the Philippines had left Cavite on their first war patrols to seek out and destroy the expected Japanese invasion forces.
We went out to take a horse traffic, and we went up for promotion of the cow promotion. And see, that was a big naval base up there. And we were supposed to observe ships going in and out of here. And surface at night and report, such and such a side ship, going down the course, so-and-so.
For Sturgeon and the other boats of the Asiatic fleet, several factors combined to neutralize the effectiveness of these first war patrols. Caution first seemed to be the motto for many skippers, career officers who were generally older and more prudent. Few were willing to toss the pre-war rulebook like kinds of periscope depth for an attack. Surface attacks were out of the question. Consequently, many of the early offensive maneuvers were made from the safety of deep water, using only passive sonar to determine range and bearing.
We fired the ships in there, but we never got a chance to actually come up and see them, Whether they sank or not, we never did know.
96 Mark 14 torpedoes were fired in 45 separate attacks over the first weeks of combat, but there were only 3 confirmed sinkings. Patrols originating from Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and the first 3 months of 1942 were credited with sinking a total of 19 enemy ships, but were hampered by tactical and operational instructions. USS Gudgeon's first foray into Japanese home waters illustrates the point. Her skipper was advised to remain submerged during daylight hours within 500 miles of her patrol area to avoid detection by aircraft. As a result, Gudgeon spent 27 days submerged during her 51-day patrol, and of these, only 12 were on station. En route back to Pearl Harbor, however, Gudgeon sank a Japanese submarine, the first enemy warship sunk by a U.S. Navy submarine in World War II. Although some early patrols mounted from Pearl Harbor targeted Japanese home waters, most were assigned the far less productive Japanese Pacific Islands and the China coast. While the lack of offensive initiative, flawed doctrine, and poor tactical positioning contributed to the slow start, they were only part of the problem. Defective torpedoes severely reduced the submarine fleet's effectiveness.
Torpedo success was less than 50%. They were very bad. That wasn't really corrected fully until late 43. Premature explosions. Sometimes the torpedo would hit the ship and nothing would happen, no explosion. And erratic runs. By erratic runs, I mean they didn't go in the direction they were supposed to. They would run deeper, or they would run shallower. And it was a very difficult time.
In the coming months, instances of inexplicable misses and dud hits began to accumulate. However, all attempts to raise the alarm through the chain of command were ridiculed by the Navy Bureau of Ordnance.
The powers that be were adamant that there was nothing wrong with the damn torpedo, but when fired under ideal conditions, it went off. But under wartime conditions, it did not go off.
It's just not having enough time to take the ships out before the war and practice with the firing and witness the results of the firing. So they simulated a lot on paper and theory before we ever get into the war. It should have been done the other way around.
The Mark 14 torpedo and its Mark 6 exploder had defects that tended to mask each other, faults that weren't revealed due to inadequate peacetime testing. It would be months before the problems were completely solved. In the interim, countless submarine crews put their lives in danger stalking enemy targets, only to be cheated of their quarry by defective torpedoes. The problems facing the American submarine fleet early in the war were numerous, but such was the case for the Allies throughout the Pacific. Beginning with the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan handed the United States and her allies a series of crushing defeats. Simultaneously with the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese moved against Malaya, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. On December 8th, an air raid on Clark Field in the Philippines destroyed most of the American Air Force stationed there before it ever left the ground. 2 days later, Japanese bombers flattened the Cavite Naval Station in Manila Bay, home of the U.S. Asiatic Fleet.
Nobody ever hears about it. You know, the beating is just not there. But they took the beating I'll take if I feel on the beating. And, you know, we wasn't in there. We was out when she got hit. The beating got hit. But they got the sea lion. And they put some holes in the sea dragon. The sea dragon got out of it. And she had some holes in it, but they patched it up and got it back over it.
With its facility ruined and practically no air cover, surface units of the Asiatic Fleet withdrew to Australia and the Dutch East Indies, where they would be out of range of Japanese aircraft on Formosa. Before the end of the year, the submarine force followed suit, abandoning the Philippines shortly after the Japanese came ashore at Lingayen Gulf, 300 miles northwest of Manila.
They told us to go into Exmouth Gulf. And they looked it up in the coast pilot, and in there it said, it didn't show nothing. It just showed the entrance and then the line stopped. And all it was, nobody knew what it was. You know, we're supposed to go in there. And they said that the last time anybody had been in there was in 1800 and something. And at that time, the natives were friendly.
As the Asiatic Fleet struggled to regroup, the Japanese overran Burma, Malaya, and Thailand. Only Java in the Dutch East Indies had yet to be conquered. U.S. submarines attempted to stem the tide by attacking the invasion forces, but to no effect. Java fell in little more than a week. By the end of March 1942, Japan had achieved nearly all of her pre-war objectives. After After the loss of the East Indies, U.S. submarines of the Asiatic Fleet withdrew to Perth Fremantle on the southwest coast of Australia. Since the outbreak of war, they had managed to sink only 10 enemy vessels, 8 merchants, a destroyer, and an aircraft carrier. Of the original 29 Manila boats, 4 had been lost. The U.S. High Command decided to leave the remaining submarines of the Asiatic Fleet down under, rather than withdraw them to Pearl Harbor. This was due in part to the decision to divide the Pacific into separate command areas. General Douglas MacArthur assumed command of the Southwest Pacific area, which included the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Borneo, Australia, New Guinea, and the western part of the Solomon Islands. Admiral Chester Nimitz would command the northern, central, and southern Pacific from Oahu. Submarines based in Australia would be well positioned to attack Japanese supply lines between Southeast Asia and the home islands, or support offensive operations in either area. By April 1942, the submarine force in Australia numbered 31 boats, with 20 at Perth Fremantle and 11 at Brisbane. The Fremantle force was meant to deploy against Japanese supply lines in the Southwest Pacific, as well as to undertake special missions ordered by General MacArthur to pick up and deliver personnel and supplies behind enemy lines.
We would come in to island at night, submerged, and then just surface enough to get our conning tower and our decks awash. And then the commandos could get their kayaks out. And then at night they would move into the islands, and believe it or not, they would count the Japanese around.
Intelligence gathering missions, whether visual, photographic, or by landing party, were an essential fleet support role throughout the war. Few Marines ever set foot on a shore that hadn't first been reconnoitered by a submarine. In late April, the Japanese mounted a dual seaborne thrust to occupy Tulagi in the Solomon Islands, and to complete their conquest of New Guinea by seizing Port Moresby. Tulagi fell without a fight, but 2 American carrier task forces intercepted the Port Moresby force. It was the first time in history that aircraft carriers fought each other. During the Battle of the Coral Sea, American air groups from Yorktown and Lexington sank the light Japanese carrier Shoho and inflicted damage on the large Japanese carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku, but sustained damage to Yorktown and lost Lexington.
The Coral Sea is considered a tactical defeat because we did lose 1 heavy fleet carrier as opposed to the Japanese losing just a small carrier. It did contribute significantly to altering the strategic direction of the war because it turned back the Japanese invasion force, and it so decimated the air groups on board Shokaku and Zuikaku that it really prevented them from participating in the upcoming Japanese operation, which turned out to be the Battle of Midway.
During the Battle of the Coral Sea, 4 submarines stationed in Brisbane were able to attack elements of the Japanese invasion force, but their only confirmed kill was a mine layer. 3 weeks after the battle, Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood assumed command of the Fremantle force. His first order of business was to verify growing evidence that the Mark 14 torpedo was malfunctioning, and tests revealed that the Mark 14 ran 10 feet deeper than it was set for. Skippers were advised to adjust running depth accordingly, but the number of sinkings remained disturbingly low. Continuing on the belief that the poor showing was due to ineffective skippers, many were relieved of their commands.
At the beginning of the war, there was some that didn't seem aggressive, and they didn't because of the torpedoes. After you fired, made your proper runs and so forth, and your calculations and all right, you hear the dust go off. You really hesitate to go in there when you know they're heavy escorts, and the chances are much slimmer of you getting hit. And I think that had more to do with it than being anything but the skippers.
Just before the Battle of the Coral Sea, it was agreed to begin exchanging submarines between Australia and Pearl Harbor so that Fremantle's boats could return to the United States for refitting. During the transit to Australia, the Pearl Harbor submarines would undertake war patrols off Japanese-held islands. Under this arrangement, and augmented by newly commissioned boats arriving from the United States, war patrols from Pearl Harbor increased sharply during April and early May 1942.
Once we were underway, everybody had a job to do. They had a station to be on. If they were like myself, a motor, she was Matt. You were either in the engine room
or in the auxiliary room doing your job, what you're supposed to be doing in your line of work. And then you were assigned like 4 hours on and 8 hours off, and it went on just around the clock that way.
A lot of people think 85, 90, 60 days at sea, but you only saw 30 because we were split up into 3 sections. And once you got settled down in the routine, your section was really the only one you saw. Section on duty, that's what they were, on duty. And you didn't have anything distracted. It's just a slip. You could put yourself in real trouble.
It was coded demands that required every ounce of your energy and your strength, mental and physically. And even sometimes you felt inadequate then.
Under such extreme conditions, the level of military courtesy and discipline on board was far more relaxed than on a surface ship.
We are pretty kind of relaxed. We were saying this, and we have the Jews that are cut short, and we have guys that have a beard and earrings.
There wasn't any stuffiness, you know, we called them sir, or Mr. So-and-so, their name, or the captain, he was always called the captain. It was such a wonderful association.
While a newcomer on board might have had difficulty distinguishing between the captain and his crew, one aspect of the submarine service clearly stood out.
They got the best food in the armed services in World War II. They always set out with, frozen cuts of meat and whatnot, which of course were rationed at home. And the guys that were out in the field and, Marines digging in here and guys going through the Battle of Polk didn't see sea rations or something like that.
We always asked for the best that we could ask for. For example, filet mignon, you come in 50-pound boxes, they were all boneless. We didn't have room for boneless. So everything was boneless. We would take them out of the packages in the wax paper, put those in the freezer, and that's what we would operate on.
When we left port, we ate like a king. And after about 20 days, it was getting kind of bad, and we couldn't run up to a flight ship. We was eating pay rations.
As the patrol wore on, the deterioration of the food quality was rivaled by the foulness of the atmosphere.
The average age of submariners in World War II was 19. That's the average age, which basically means it's a bunch of high school kids that are operating the most technically advanced, vessel of war that exists in the world. So if you can imagine yourself stuck with 80 guys, all of which are about teenage or high teenage years, that are actually doing heavy labor down in the South Pacific, going through drills. Everybody's got smelly feet, the whole deal. They're not really changing their clothes too much, and you only get to shower about every 2 weeks. Now you can start to imagine what the smell on this thing would have been like when you combine that with hydraulic fluid and diesel fuel and whatnot.
Though the increase in patrol frequency during the spring of 1942 improved the chances of success, the numbers returning from the battlefront continued to dismay fleet commanders. The Pearl Harbor boats were credited with sinking only 33 enemy ships between January and May 1942. Tellingly, the greatest success came on patrols to Japanese home waters and the East China Sea. Stakeouts of Japanese bases in the Central Pacific continued to yield meager results.
Warship is kind of hard to tell because they go too fast for the sun. By the time you see it, they're gone. You have to be lucky to be right in front across your path.
In mid-May, Navy code-breaking efforts provided advance warning of a major Japanese offensive aimed at Midway Island, just 700 miles from Pearl Harbor. Admiral Nimitz immediately deployed his 3 remaining aircraft carriers to intercept, and the result is often described as the turning point of the Pacific War. Though a major success for American surface units, the Battle of Midway was an exercise in frustration for U.S. submariners.
Early in the war, we found we were not as effective as we might be trying to operate with the fleet. And Midway is an example. We had a huge number of submarines there trying to intercept the Jap fleet, and one of them even attacked a ship.
19 boats had sortied from Pearl Harbor, but confusion, indecision, and poor contact reporting spoiled what might have been a signature battle for U.S. submarines. It was late on June 6th, with the battle largely over thanks to devastating air attacks launched from Hornets, Yorktown, and Enterprise, that the USS Nautilus fired 4 torpedoes at a disabled Japanese carrier. True to form, 1 failed to run, 2 ran erratically, and the 4th was a dud. The experience of the submarine force operating at Midway was disheartening, but later, as the number of available submarines swelled and the war moved into more confined waters with distinct shipping routes, the submarine's fleet role would be proven with devastating effect. Hoping to build on the shift in momentum that occurred at Midway, U.S. Marines of the 1st Division invaded Guadalcanal in early August. It was America's first offensive operation of the war. The campaign to secure the island lasted 6 months, and for much of its course, the balance teetered precariously from one side to the other. Consequently, the Southwest Pacific Submarine Force in Australia was regularly assigned interdiction missions in support of the Solomons effort, seeking to prevent the Japanese from reinforcing their island garrisons by sea. So critical was the Guadalcanal campaign that submarine squadrons 8 and 10 were transferred from Pearl Harbor to Brisbane, which then boasted the largest concentration of U.S. submarines in the Pacific. However, the resulting dilution of effort left only Lockwood's Fremantle boats and roughly half of the Pearl Harbor submarines to actively engage enemy supply lines. As the disappointing 1942 wound to a close, a tally of the campaign to date revealed that U.S. submarines had destroyed a total of 147 Japanese ships, or less than half a ship per patrol. Of these, only 2 were major warships. Significantly, missions to Japan, which numbered less than 1 in 5, accounted for nearly half of all the ships sunk. After the defeat at Guadalcanal early in 1943, the Japanese shifted their focus to defending what remained of their earlier conquests, while the Allies began developing a plan that would allow them to gain the offensive initiative. With war material of all kinds beginning to flow from the United States, the Allies were able to pursue a dual-pronged strategy. Forces under the command of General MacArthur would simultaneously attack the northern Solomons and leapfrog westerly along the coast of northern New Guinea, isolating Japanese garrisons stationed there, and ultimately bypassing Rabaul. Admiral Nimitz would begin the drive across the central Pacific with invasions of Tarawa and Macon in the Gilbert Islands, before proceeding further west across the Pacific toward Japan. Such ambitious plans would take some time to put in place, so again, it fell to the men of the silent service to keep the pressure on. By mid-spring 1943, the submarine force at Pearl Harbor, now under the command of Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, had grown to 50 boats. The main submarine's Pacific headquarters at Pearl Harbor and the advanced base at Midway hummed with activity as boats returned from patrols for refitting or set sail for the war zone. The base at Midway provided a fueling station 1,100 miles closer to Japan and did much to improve the logistical situation for subpack. Between April and August, an average of 18 subpack boats left each month for war patrols of 40 to 50 days. Notably, over half were targeted at enemy shipping in Japanese Empire waters and the East China Sea. This shift in deployment marked a significant change from the strategy that had continued to place a high priority on hard-to-target enemy capital ships in spite of poor results, and was further justified by the 4th War Patrol of the USS Wahoo. When the Gato-class submarine Wahoo arrived at Pearl Harbor in August 1942, she joined a submarine force struggling to find success. Her first 2 patrols were marked by attack failures, but when charismatic Lieutenant Commander Dudley Mush Morton assumed command at the end of the year, her fortunes and the rest of the submarine fleets began to change. Personable with his crew and aggressive in his leadership, Morton reorganized Wahoo's patrol procedures. Wahoo transited to her 3rd patrol's operating area on the surface in daylight despite the threat of Japanese planes. He trusted his executive officer, Richard O'Kane, to make all periscope observations during attacks, which allowed Morton to better evaluate the entire combat situation. As commanding officer of USS Tang, O'Kane eventually became the submarine force's leading ace of the war, credited with destroying 31 ships. Wahoo's 3rd patrol and 1st under Morton netted 3 ships, but that was only the beginning. On his next patrol, Morton sailed into the shallow confines of the East China and Yellow Seas, In a series of slashing gun and torpedo attacks, Morton sent 9 ships to the bottom. It was by far the most successful patrol of the war to date and proved to be the turning point of the Pacific Submarine War. Inspired by Morton's tactics and innovation, other commanders began to adapt Wahoo's aggressive style and take their fight to the enemy.
These were all younger officers. I think that they set the whole procedure of submarine warfare for those people did, not the Navy. As far as doctrine that we had been schooled in, as far as the depth that we would travel, when we would put the periscope up and that sort of thing, this was developed in the field by our own skippers. And breaking away from the old conservative, non-aggressive rules that have governed the way we reacted.
The determination and character exhibited by Morton and the crew of Wahoo was hardly unique to that vessel. Just being accepted for submarine duty was a testament to these sailors' abilities.
In order to get in submarines, you had to pass a rigorous set of exams to show that you were very smart, to show that you had psychologically what it takes to live with 80 other guys for a little over 2 months on a war patrol without ever seeing the sun, in close quarters with very little privacy. So these guys had a lot of camaraderie, they had a lot of respect for each other.
The people that were involved in it, they were the cream of America's crop. They were the finest, physically adapted people, mentally, and they had a tremendous attitude.
There was a very elaborate and in-depth screening process. And to give an example of the number of people made it, there were 105 that volunteered with me, like 6 of us passed. So it was extremely difficult service. It was all volunteers, 100% volunteers.
The elite group of men who formed the submarine force made up only 1.6% of the entire U.S. Navy. Each had received 50% more pay than the rest of their Navy comrades for their willingness to accept the hazards, rigors, and privations of service aboard a World War II-era submarine.
I first became aware of submarines when I was 10 years old, and from that day on, I wanted to be a submariner. And I have to think most of them did. We weren't there for the money. It was nice. It was nice to get the extra money. But the most of us there because that's what we wanted.
Service aboard a submarine was far different than in any other branch of the military in the Second World War. During a patrol that could last up to 10 weeks, most crewmen only rarely caught a glimpse of sky or the taste of fresh air, let alone actually setting foot on dry land.
And you didn't know what day it was, you didn't know what day or night, and you were taking care. You didn't have a job to do. And of course, also you had a sanitary problem because you had 80 men on there who hadn't had a bath and over along your route.
Patrols were all glorious and a lot of fun. There was a lot of tedium and boredom, weeks at a time before you might see a target and break up the monotony. But I think the fact that we all suffered the same suffrages and the same glories and so on is what brought us all together.
Along with the monotony, training drills were another fact of life for submariners.
In our day, it took 5 men just to dive it, the surfaces, and it took about 20 to operate it. And it had to be done in unison and in perfect coordination. And just one mistake could cost the life of everybody on the boat. And so you were very acutely aware of your responsibilities.
In order to attain the rating of qualified in submarines, each man in the crew of approximately 80 had to know how to perform every single job aboard a U.S. submarine, the most sophisticated and complex man of war at the time.
Every single person on this boat had a job to do, and if they didn't do their job, everyone else on the boat could literally die. Anyone from the captain right down to the cook had to know what every single thing did, every compartment. So if you were in that compartment when you underwent some kind of attack, where there was some kind of emergency, you would know what to do in order to save the boat.
Of course, the very first patrol that you go out on, of course, you're a new man and you really got to learn things. But it's up to you to find out what it's all about, or just really investigate and ask questions, and so you'll be able to qualify. So you will know your submarine and know what it's all about.
You had to make drawings of every system throughout the boat. Then an officer board would take you through the boat and question you on every compartment in the boat.
You had to qualify on each submarine that you served on. You had to re-qualify, even though the subs might be from the from the same shipyard, but you had to requalify. But when you got your Dolphins, I think you were the proudest man in the Navy.
The esprit de corps that developed among submariners was not entirely unique within the military. Elite units like airborne troops and close-knit groups like bomber crews or naval aviators shared a high level of camaraderie. Yet for these and virtually all other servicemen in World War II, the near certainty of death should disaster strike did not exist.
I think you come so to death so many times with each other that you just develop a brotherhood, I would say. It's hard to describe, but you talk about families. I think we were even closer than families.
Everyone knew that their life depended on the man next to them, and everyone knew that the man next to them's life depended on them doing their job. So there was a huge amount of esprit de corps. The disadvantages, of course, were, first of all, as a proportion, this was the most risky arm of the armed services to serve in. Your chances of coming back on one of these alive were lower than any other thing you can think of. Daylight bombing rates over Germany, storming Iwo Jima with Marines. Your chances were better at surviving those activities than it was to be on one of these submarines in World War II. They had 24% casualty rates. It's very rare for men to actually survive any kind of damage or attack on a submarine. So if something went wrong, 80 guys just went to the bottom.
No one was immune to the inherent dangers of the submarine service. In the fall of 1943, Mush Morton and Wahoo returned to the Sea of Japan and went on a rampage, sinking at least 4 ships over the course of several days. While attempting to exit via La Perouse Strait, Wahoo was detected by Japanese anti-submarine aircraft, and a coordinated air and sea attack commenced. Morton and his crew of 79 men were never heard from again. Since he had assumed overall command of the Pacific Submarine Force early in 1943, much of Rear Admiral Lockwood's attention was consumed by nagging materiel problems. Foremost among these was torpedoes, not only a shortage of supply, but continuing evidence of serious malfunction. Lockwood's tests at Fremantle in mid-1942 established that U.S. torpedoes were running too deep, but after correcting the problem, torpedo performance failed to improve. Premature warhead detonations, believed to be the result of a too sensitive magnetic influence exploder, continued to bedevil the fleet. Lockwood convinced Admiral Nimitz to rely solely on the Mark 14's contact exploder. But even with the magnetic feature disabled, Pacific Fleet submarines continued to experience a significant percentage of duds.
I know one particular run we made, we fired 19 torpedoes, and we could hear it hitting the hull. And they were being fired on from the direction the torpedoes were coming from. But we never got any damage done.
You never saw such a dejected bunch in your life as you did when 4 torpedoes were fired and the soundman heard 2 of them hit and none go off. It was frustration of the first order.
During a series of experiments conducted in Hawaii in September 1943, it was determined that when a torpedo struck at a 90-degree angle, which was considered ideal, the firing pin would buckle, which in some cases prevented it from contacting the exploder kit. Merely installing a stronger firing pin resolved the issue. With this simple modification, the performance of the Mark 14 torpedo finally reached acceptability, but it had taken half the war to get there. The ongoing shortage of torpedoes, a persistent problem early in the war, was remedied by the gradual introduction of the Mark 18 electric torpedo beginning in mid-1943. Although slower than the Mark 14 and somewhat limited in range, the Mark 18 left no telltale wake that could give away a submarine's position.
Almost invariably, fire torpedoes, the escorts could see the torpedo tracks and knew where the torpedoes came from. And they just run down the torpedo track expecting to find a submarine at the other end, and they usually would. And Japanese anti-submarine efforts were primarily passive or listening sonar rather than active sonar, what you think like our ASW efforts were largely. And Pollock wasn't as fast as the new submarines, but also she was very noisy. If they were going to be listening, the submarine that made the most noise was the ones that hear first, and that was us.
The primary anti-submarine weapon during World War II was the depth charge, a canister of high explosives set to go off at a predetermined depth.
The object means to have a depth charge go under the submarine so that the explosion came up. We use various and sundry methods of evading on the possible, and I'm living proof that we evaded like many.
The first time to go through that, it was really terrifying. You have actually here two explosions. Of course, when the depth charge explodes, there's a space that's void that's left. And of course, that puts back in as soon as the explosion is completed. And you just don't know when the next one's coming.
During the first part of the war, the Japanese tended to set their depth charges too shallow, unaware that U.S. submarines could dive below 150 feet.
Early in the war, there was a fact-finding committee that Congressman sent out to the Pacific. And when they got back, one of them made the remark that our submariners didn't have anything to worry about. The Japanese weren't setting their depth charges deep enough. Well, the Japanese can read too. And I'd say in the next 6 months, we lost 10 submarines because they just started setting them deeper.
The tenacity of a depth charge attack was another important variable. With a full battery charge, a sub could remain submerged for over 36 hours. But by that point, it would be absolutely essential to surface and recharge.
If you were down for a prolonged period, the battery gets very low. You lose the benefit of the oxygen in the ship that you've been breathing up all day. It's 3 foul below. And sometimes you're held down to practically the full limit of the battery. And possibly even some other ships go off because they could never get up in time to charge the battery and didn't have enough power to pull out of it.
More submarines were lost to depth charges during the war than any other cause, but the vast majority escaped to fight another day. Although the submarine squadrons at both Fremantle and Brisbane maintained a steady level of activity throughout 1943, Brisbane lost importance as the war moved up the Solomon's chain and westward into New Guinea. By late in the year, just 8 boats were stationed there, but an advanced base established at Milne Bay, New Guinea, put them 1,200 miles closer to their patrol areas. Between June and December, 33 war patrols sent to monitor the supply lines linking Truk, Rabaul, and Palau resulted in 29 confirmed sinkings. During that same period, the 22 submarines stationed at Fremantle sank nearly 50 enemy ships, a dozen of them oil tankers bound from Borneo and Sumatra.
The emphasis was switched pretty much to tankers, and we sank up on Japanese merchant marine tankers, and that's the thing, the argument about, well, we shouldn't have dropped atom bombs because we sunk on the Japanese tankers and they were running out of fuel.
Late in 1943, as MacArthur's forces hammered away at Japanese garrisons in New Guinea and the Northern Solomons, and the Marines in the Central Pacific were regrouping after the brutal invasion of Tarawa, Lockwood began deploying small, coordinated submarine wolf packs as tactical units.
With that kind of an operation, we could cover a larger area of the ocean. With 3 submarines out there, we could talk to each other on secure radio. And if one of the submarines picked up enemy convoy, well, they could tell the others. And then the Commodore could order the others into positions where he thought they might all have an opportunity to attack some of the ships in the convoy.
Communications and coordination among Wolfpack members at sea was often difficult, but during the last 2 years of the war, wolfpacking became increasingly common, particularly for commerce raiding north of Luzon, where several Japanese north-south convoy routes from the conquered territories converged.
The people in Pearl Harbor had laid out a checkerboard-like arrangement of areas, and we were given a certain sequence of movement where we would move from one area to another area to another area. And if we saw a convoy or some warships going through a part of our area that we didn't have time to get to, we could call Pearl Harbor. They could then notify other submarines in the other squares along which that those ships were going to travel, so that they could have an opportunity to attack them.
Along with tactical innovations that continued to evolve throughout the war, new boats arriving in the fleet added ever greater capabilities. The Lau-class submarines, the first of the thick-skinned boats that integrated higher-strength steel in the pressure hull, were introduced in 1943. Almost identical in appearance to Gatos, the important difference was in design depth. The Palau class was rated to 400 feet, a full 100 feet deeper than Gatos could go. Tench class boats, which began to appear in 1944, could exceed 600 feet.
They could go twice as deep as you could, and it took twice as long as the depth charges to get down there, and the depth charges were only half as accurate for this on the new fleet boats as the opens.
Regardless of class, fleet submarines underwent a constant program of modification, much of which was carried out by submarine tenders, auxiliary ships specially equipped to perform maintenance and provide logistics support for submarines. The advantage of putting submarine supplies, spare parts, service facilities, and berthing on a surface ship was that it made them as portable as the submarines themselves. Setting up a new forward submarine base became almost as simple as dropping anchor.
When somebody came alongside, maybe has some problem with their motors or something, electric motor or something, the machine shop can take care of those things, and the torpedoes or whatever. And then they also have food that they could take some food for them. And they always have a crate of oranges and food for them right away on to take out to the submarine. And we also had an ice cream making machine there, on the tender, things like that. So, and more supply and repairs, small repairs, main function.
Fleet submarines back from the front often required little more than fuel and provisions, but just as often